The UPMC sports medicine experts in Central PA are here to help keep you in the game and improve your quality of life, no matter your age or activity level. Visit upmc.com/Central PA SportsMed to learn more.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Pennsylvania High School Football Report podcast. I'm Brian Linder. I'm here with Dan Sostek. Dan, say what's up to the people, man.
How y'all doing? I'm starting to get warmer out, so I'm have a more energetic introduction today.
You almost sounded like you were stealing a little bit of my South Carolina dialect there with the "how y'all doing."
I'll go how yin's doing to go back to Pittsburgh.
There you go. Well, look, Eric Epler may drop in on this podcast. He's supposed to be here, but he's ghosting us. So,
When Ep isn't responding, he's either doing the most important stuff in the world or he's asleep. There's no in between.
We're doing this again, guys. Usually we try to come to these podcasts with a script. There's no script. Not when I say script, not all scripted, but like a plan. There's no plan here, Dan.
Yep.
Now, what we can talk about is wrestling's coming up. We talked about it a little bit last week, but now everything's sort of, we had the super regionals and all that good stuff. You were out at the, tell you what, let's step away 1 second from high school football. You were out at the first District 3, right?
Yep.
Girls wrestling.
Technically the South Central Super. I don't understand why wrestling does this, where they refer to what is clearly the District 3 championships as the South Central like regional championship. It's a silly thing, but yeah.
Yeah, we're coming up on the first sanctioned PIAA girls state championship for wrestling, and you were, like I said, you were out there for what was really the District 3 affair over the weekend of championships. What are you seeing from these girls, man, heading into states?
It's really cool, man. Like, you can tell just talking to these girls, like especially the really cream of the crop, that like they are as serious about this as any of the boys. They've been doing this for a long time. We've got two the mid pen has two girls ranked number one in the state in Eliana White Vega and Charlotte Guilfoyle. And the way they talk, I mean, they're White Vega was talking about she wants to be at the Olympics in 4 years. You're probably going to see odds are one of these girls is going to be in the UFC one day or something, just because of how big of a base wrestling is for that sport. But it was really cool to see kind of a sport have that moment with where they've been kind of working in silence for a long time, and now kind of get to have their moment a little bit. So that was cool to see. And a lot of them, there were some. Jimmy Brown was there with me, and there were a couple flat out form tackles that made you think some of these girls could slip in as a linebacker out on the football teams. Like, some of these girls are really tough. So it was a cool day at Penn Manor.
Yeah, and we'll be out there this weekend, guys. Be sure you listen or watch, follow along to PennLive and watch, find, streams from the event. I mean, this is the first ever, and first ever sanctioned girls state championship, so it's historical. And there really are some talented young ladies out there who could probably beat me and you right now, Dan.
Yeah, I had to be especially nice. Didn't want to get beat up at Penn Manor. Although I did used to wrestle. Brian's got some proof, but
yeah. I'm going to maybe tweet out Dan's wrestling photo one day, so you guys stay tuned. But I'll tell you what, we talked about it a little bit last week. We do have some impressive football players coming up in the that'll be in the boys state championship side too. And you and I were talking. I mean, there's a couple guys there just from District 3, and Kevin Brown from Harrisburg, big offensive lineman, defensive lineman. He's like 6'5", like 250 and shredded. And some other guys too who, like Caleb Brewer, who's going to Penn State.
Michael Hershey.
Yeah. Michael Hershey, Spring Grove, who's going to Maryland. These guys they're big guys. They're going to play offensive line.
Sean Kinney.
Who's that?
Sean Kinney from
Kinney's a monster from Nazareth, right?
Yeah, he's I believe he lost to Riley Rebel in the state championship last year. I could be wrong. Or no, never mind. They're in a different classification. But yeah, Sean Kinney's one of the best as well. Then even a couple weight classes below, you got one of our best players locally, Cole Bartram's got a chance to get another top 3 finish at states as well.
Just like we always joke that like Riley Robel could end up in the UFC one day, and he really might if football doesn't work out at James Madison. But I mean, all of these guys kind of look like the UFC heavyweight. Now, if you guys turn on UFC or MMA in general, I mean, the lower levels of MMA, probably not so much, but UFC these days, these heavyweights, man, they're lean and mean and muscle bound and stuff. And these young men look like that. Out of all these guys, Dan, before we even get to wrestling, if you had a futures UFC draft, who are you taking here?
It'd be hard not to pick Kevin. The only reason I wouldn't go Kevin Brown is because the one issue with the heavyweight divisions in the UFC are that the absolute best athletes usually end up in the NFL because it pays better. So because the pay's not great in the UFC unless you're Conor McGregor. But so I honestly kind of don't know if I would go Kevin Brown because I think that he's got such a high ceiling in football. He might end up going pro there, but maybe after he's done, in terms of skill, I think he's got the best skill set to translate to MMA just because of how fast he is at that weight.
He's only wrestled. I mean, he didn't wrestle last year, right? He played basketball, and he finished third in district, or whatever we're calling it.
Yeah.
And now he's here.
We've also got Garrett Garcia from Southern Columbia, really good wrestler as well. So yeah,
he had like 140 or 50 tackles.
Yeah, Lucas Lawler from Bishop McDevitt, really kind of underrated defensive end for that team. I think he was one of their leading sack guys this past year. He's a really good wrestler as well. So yeah, always a lot of talent. I mean, we said it last week, but maybe only Ohio rivals Pennsylvania in terms of how good the state wrestling tournament is. It's just insane. Like there's so many of these kids are either undefeated or one loss and going against some of the best in the country. So for these football players to get there, it tells you a lot. And I've done the story about it before. I'm sure you have as well at some point. But a lot of football coaches love when their kids wrestle, right? Because the skill set is just so translatable, especially if you're playing on the lines. You learn all about leverage, and even beyond that stuff, even beyond the technique stuff. You're hard pressed to find a sport that builds a level of toughness like wrestling does. Like those practices kind of make football practices look like cakewalk. They are serious about conditioning. They are serious about strength and that. And I mean, we've seen in the NFL, we've seen guys like Stephen Neal didn't even play football, was a wrestling champion at Ohio State, become a Patriots Super Bowl champion offensive lineman. Guys like Rock Ya-Sin were wrestling champions in their state. So yeah, it's probably, I would say, like one of the most hand-in-hand sports with football, especially at some certain positions.
Yeah, I always tell people that, Dan, it's funny because like my high school, when I came through, we were in the highest classification in South Carolina, and we were a big school, but we actually did not have a wrestling team.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. Wrestling isn't.
It's not as big in the South, right? Yeah,
it's not as big, and we didn't have a wrestling team. But then when I got out years later, I actually trained in a MMA gym at Black Force MMA in Summerville, South Carolina. If anybody's has anybody in South Carolina that's looking for a good MMA gym, I recommend going there. The owner, Dwight Decker, is a friend. He actually married my wife and I. But I trained in some jiu-jitsu there and catch wrestling. And holy heck, it's really a shock because when I went into it,
you don't realize how tiring it is, and it's like the most tiring stuff.
What it is just the workouts and just the training in general for like catch wrestling and wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and it may be different from wrestling some, but I think a lot of the mat stuff is similar in some way. The core muscles and stuff that are involved, when I went into it, I was probably 125 pounds lighter I had hips and I used to go to the gym every day and I had muscles, and it really kicked my butt because it just works muscles that you don't think it's more functional than
Yep.
like you go to the gym and lift. And it's an incredible workout. And I would encourage anybody, you're looking to get in shape, you're saying, oh, I'm gonna sign up for a gym. Don't just sign up for a gym. Go find like a good jiu-jitsu gym, someplace that's jiu-jitsu and catch wrestling. You'll get your workout in, you'll get shredded, and you'll get functional usage. Getting a little bit off that topic of football, but I always say it taught me the mental toughness just to stick in that training,
Yeah.
and then when I see football players who excel, who are wrestlers, whenever I see a football player as a wrestler, it kind of makes me lift an eyebrow. And I'm not a college recruiter, but I can see why college recruiters do too, because that guy's going to be mentally tough. That guy's going to be tough. That guy's going to know about leverage. He's going to have
You're gonna be in shape.
He's going to know how to move guys around. And there's so much crossover there. So we'll be out in full force, like I said, at the state championships this weekend. And I'd encourage everybody to, if you're a football fan, maybe you don't really know a lot about wrestling, you don't like wrestling, but if you want to see like maybe who the big guy's going to be or the bully's going to be on the block next year or this upcoming fall, some of the best guys in the state are going to be out there. And again, I think Hershey's a senior; he's going to go on to Maryland. But like a guy like Kevin Brown is a young guy who, he's got 2 more years left, and we're expecting major things for Kevin Brown. You see this kid, he just looks like if football doesn't work out, he's going to do something. He might be an actor. He's kind of cool in that way, right?
Yeah, he looks like he could be in the Expendables 7 by the time he's 30 or whatever.
Yeah. So Kevin Brown, if you're listening, we're pumping you up. But yeah, it's a fun thing to watch, just to kind of see who's going to be who. So we'll be all at that. You guys watch PennLive.com for that, and a little bit different in football, but it kind of helps get you prep for football. But you know what, Dan? We're here in March, and I want to say we're coming up. Soon we'll be right into spring. So we'll be getting into some 7-on-7s and spring workouts. I was actually messaging with Joe Heeden last week about their 7-on-7s this summer. So you're going to start seeing more of that. And I know some of the kids have already been out playing that stuff, and also we always tell you guys it's a year round thing for football. I tell you what else, Dan. I was reading today that they're going to move that signing day up.
Well, yeah, isn't it going to be before the conference championships now in college football?
And it's going to be a 3-day early period. So that'd be interesting, and it'd be interesting how, like, I haven't got a chance to think about the total effect for that, but I'm sure a lot of it plays into kids jumping into the portal and transferring and stuff like that. And I know you've kind of looked at that before. Any thoughts on the moving it up?
Yeah, I wonder if it's a chance to kind of get kids locked in before the portal stuff starts. It'll be interesting to see how that works if it just ends up only being blue chip guys because you want to keep your options open, or if it locks more people in because you don't want to be left empty handed after striking out in the transfer portal. So listen, any more flexibility for these kids, I think, is good. You just hope that's what it is. And again, I'm mostly fine with the transfer portal. I obviously think there's, it's probably not the best thing in the world that players are changing teams every couple of years. But guess what? It doesn't have to. They don't have to. They should be worried about what makes the product best. They should worry about themselves, and college athletes should be worried about themselves. And until they're making millions of dollars, that should be the calculus. So I think any flexibility good. And listen, as long as I get my NCAA football in a video game in July, I don't care. Anything else can go.
Well, I always come down on the side of the players, because I always tell people this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that was designed by adults, and people always seem to want to blame the kids when they transfer and stuff. And I say, look, they're just playing in a system that the adults created. And I've always said that it's hard to me to lock in a kid from making a decision when he's 15 or 16. And maybe a lot of these kids, man, some of them are coming from where they don't have a lot, and they're going out on these visits, and all these schools have a lot. And So there's a wow factor. And, if they commit and then their coach changes and, or heck, even look, I don't even necessarily blame a kid, Dan, if he goes out there and he competes and he's not a starter and there's somewhere else he can be a starter because life is short. And I get, we should teach people to compete. But life is short too. And if there's somewhere else you can contribute, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But what I
And
will,
there are so many like false promises flying around during these recruitments too. Like that's the thing that we're never going to know about. Fans are never going to know about. That players probably aren't going to come in outright say this coach lied to me. But I guarantee that's happening.
yeah, and you know what I'll say, Dan, though, is I do think even though I come down inside the players, college football is in a predicament right now because what they've essentially done is they had since since forever to come up with a system that works, and they balked at everything, and then you get into this NIL system, and essentially where now you're like the NFL, except the NFL has long term contracts, and you only have 1 year deals. Which, guess what? The scholarships were only 1 year deals to begin with. Schools used to always like to make that a point at certain times when a kid got a scholarship revoked, but now they really are just 1 year deals. So basically, you have free agency. Every player's a free agent after every year. So what does that tell me? It tells me that the system is broken, and the only way to fix it is to really, I think, instead of people say, well, they're paying the players now. They're not paying the players. We're in a name, image, likeness moment right now where they're getting money from outside sources based off of what their name value is or what their perceived value is in the program. But I think the only way you fix it now, Dan, it's just like I guess Dartmouth basketball just had the ruling where they were called school employees. You're going to have to call them employees, and you're going to have to pay them and get them on contracts if you want to keep them. That are longer than 1 year. Because if not, you're going to have every year everybody's going to be a free agent. It's chaos.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been a lot of talk. It's college basketball season, almost March Madness. Been a lot of talk on social media and everything about how college basketball, you could make a really strong argument that the women's game is in a better place than the men's game right now because the women's game has marketable, recognizable stars like Caitlin Clark that have been at one program for 4 years, that are huge deals, that are at the prime of their sport. It's basically women's college basketball is kind of at the bird magic moment in the 70s that college basketball men have. While on the men's side, every team's different after 1 year, 2 years. Like, my Pitt Panthers, everyone's worried they've got two young freshman guards who have been really good this year. And the only talking point is, man, I hope we can keep them for another year. That's hard to build like fan bases, and college football is in a very similar spot. You have a good quarterback that plays well for a year or two. The talking point isn't, man, I'm so excited to see him next year. It's, geez, I hope we can raise the funds to keep him in the program. And it's, again, this isn't blaming the athletes at all. It's just kind of, it's what happens when the NCAA had 50 years to prepare for this and just said, no, that won't happen. And then it happened, and it's kind of a mess now. Unless you have Caitlin Clark. So yeah, maybe they need some football players throwing the ball behind their back or something. They need a Johnny Manziel, another Johnny Manziel type to come through, because that was one of my favorite NIL talking points. Is how much money do you think Johnny Manziel would have made when he was at A&M if NIL was legal?
He'd be worth millions.
Yeah.
I got Manziel stuff in here now in my room, in my blue room here, my basement, my man cave, just because. I mean, and you know what? He had a heck of an interview on that Club Shay Shay thing.
Yeah, he did. And
But
then he's like hinting at coming back to the NFL, which is very funny. But
but yeah, back to this NIL thing. Look, and you can't blame a kid, like you said. If I'm at Incarnate Word and I go and I throw for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, and all of a sudden I have a SEC team where I'm getting an NIL offer to go sign with, I'm getting an offer from that school, and I'm getting NIL offer of like $2 million, $1 million. You see some crazy numbers sometimes. to go sign with the school.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, you're a 19-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid. Maybe you coming from a home that where your family, your mom and dad, your dad might be a mechanic, your mom might be a waitress. You might not have a lot of money. It's
Yeah.
hard to turn that down because the NFL is not for everyone.
No.
Um, and uh, and you need to make your money while you can. So I can't blame the kids for this. I think that the fix is they're going to eventually going to have to call them all employees. And maybe you have different levels. Maybe years ago, Gerald Harrison Jr., when he was an assistant AD at Duke, he spoke at our touchdown club in Orangeburg, and this was probably 15 years ago when he talked about the super conference. Like they would just all these schools would come together, form one giant super conference, and they would pay players, and then everybody else would kind of be like college football below them. Um, I think you may have something like that because obviously your Division II schools and even some of your lower Division Is aren't going to be able to play at this level. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of figuring out that's going to
Because
happen.
that stuff's kind of tough too, though, because then that doesn't. I've always thought that kind of sort of kills some of the spirit of college football and like college sports in general, right? Which is, a lot of the appeal is seeing these the big programs and seeing the collection of talent, right? But it's also you do kind of lose that David versus Goliath stuff, the chance to have an Appalachian State over Michigan, things like that, when you kind of separate stuff to that degree. But you're right. Like there's no real other solution besides that. Like they're in a situation where they're gonna have to make a tough choice.
The UPMC sports medicine experts in Central PA are here to help keep you in the game and improve your quality of life, no matter your age or activity level. Visit upmc.com/Central PA SportsMed to learn more.
I think when it all gets sorted out, Dan, you're going to come to a point though where your big schools are going to be so stacked and so much better than say your Appalachian states that it's not even going to be Dave. I mean, it'll be a health issue, I think, for those schools to be playing them. A player safety issue because you're going to have again. I think at some point you're going to see where players with these bigger schools become employees. Again, I look at that.
See, my issue with that is, or my disagreement with that, I don't think it will ever get to that point. Just because I don't think that we're ever going to be good enough at analyzing football talent, given how many football players there are, that that smart teams won't be able to, build up kind of rosters that fit their teams and kind of build up competitive teams. The issue, I think, is that those teams are going to be feeder systems. That if they find those good players, they're eventually going to leave and get to the bigger programs, and then that's kind of the issue. So,
That's the
it,
point.
yeah,
That's why you almost have to make them. If you don't want yearly turnover, you won't maintain a fan base. Then you're going to have to give them employee status.
yeah.
But then, like you said,
Yeah, but and I mean, that's always the point that kind of fascinates me, though, is that no matter how good these schools are, no matter how rich these programs are, there's still going to be like 52-star recruits that are better than 5-star recruits in football, and that's kind of the beauty. That is kind of where the beauty in college sports lie, though, right? Is seeing those guys, and you don't want to lose that kind of that fun aspect of finding those kids. But also, again, it returns to our original point that you also want those kids to be able to then have the flexibility to do what's right for themselves and right for the future. So,
and even if you talk about making them employees, that doesn't work for the economics. I'm sure of every school. I'm sure it doesn't work for the economics of like Shippensburg or like Charleston Southern or So I don't know, man. I tell you, it's going to be obviously it's changing, right? I do think it's broken, and again, I favor systems that are skewed to the athletes, but it's going to be hard to build fan bases if you have yearly free agency. And this again is all the blame shouldn't be on the kids; it should be on the adults. They fumbled this thing into what it is. There could have been a better way for these guys to get what they're worth and to maintain some sort of sanity instead of having all out chaos after every season. It's funny because I was reading Nick Saban apparently talked about the reaction to their playoff loss was one of the reasons he retired, with guys kind of throwing their helmets. And then I think he said something like, guys want to know two things after the season. How much playing time are they going to be guaranteed next year? How much money they can get. And look, I mean, heck, I mean that. I don't know if you should be asking for guaranteed playing time versus going out there and earning it, but I don't necessarily have a problem, like I said, with the guy wanting to know his value.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason we're talking about this so much is that this is going to apply to a lot of our local athletes. I mean, just today, we've seen, just like in the past 2 days, we've seen two of our bigger, recruits in the area, you know, dealing with their recruitment and stuff from big name programs. And it's just going to it's going to keep becoming a bigger and bigger part of this.
It's funny we haven't seen, we got high school NIL here in Pennsylvania last year. I don't really think it's made much of a difference for just about anybody. I know, like,
there's a limit to it. It's like $500, right, max or something. 350.
I don't even know if there's. I didn't even pay attention to that, but it just seems like there's really not been.
I think you can only profit to $350. So I don't think it's.
That's really way. How can you tell people they can only make how much they're worth? How about this?
Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that
What if the high school music student made an album, and somebody wanted to sign to a record contract for $1 million? You said, "Oh, it can only be for $350."
Well, the argument would be that they don't play at a school sanction if band.
Did they go in a school sanctioned art class?
But it's a little. I think it's a little different.
What if they were in band? What if they were in band?
Well, I was in. I played in jazz band. We never made any money off that.
Why is it just the athletes? But I'm saying, what if they're in the school band and they make a music CD or make an album, and somebody wants to sign them to $1 million contract? So, you can only sign for $350.
Well, I mean, I think if they were offered, if someone started a new league for high school football athletes and offered Kevin Brown $1 million, he'd be allowed to do that, right? I think.
Hey, look, let me tell you, spring football doesn't really work for me, and I'll tell you why. It's the quarterback play. Play. When you get bad quarterback play, football's just not fun to watch sometimes.
Yeah. I'm well aware, Brian. I'm a Pitt fan, so I've dealt with it.
But I'll tell you what, man. If there was a high school football league where you had like these power programs that had like elite players and they played in the spring, I saw a guy like pitch this. I thought last year was trying to work on this. But say if you had like 12 teams, 15 teams, 20 teams nationwide, whatever, were just like these power programs and they just played each other and didn't have like a national championship. I'm in. Play that during the spring. I'm in.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
I'll watch that all day long. Over. I'm sorry, The Rock. Sorry, dude. I'm not. I've tried the XFL, Dan. I've tried the USFL. It just doesn't work for me.
Oh, it's bad. Yeah, it's bad. Football's not fun to watch. It's why honestly, even the NFL at points this year was kind of tough. When things aren't going well, especially on the offensive end, it's kind of a slog. That's kind of why I thought the college football playoffs were so enjoyable this past year. You got that Washington Texas game was a blast because it was fun modern offense and stuff. So
yeah, I'm happy for the guys who get an opportunity in XFL and USFL and to keep it going. That's what they want to do, but football with bad quarterback play can be pretty bad at the higher levels, especially when the defense is just flying. You can get around with a little bit less, quarterback play when everybody's not an NFL player or almost NFL level. Because I think they're really, I will say, a lot of the guys outside of probably your quarterbacks and stuff, there's probably a hair's difference between them and an NFL player. Like a lot of these guys could probably be on the bottom end of rosters, or for whatever reason they didn't find the right fit. So they're probably right at that level to some extent. So anyway, that's where we are with that, Dan. That's where I'm at with that stuff. I would love to see, sign me up for the spring high school league with all saying that. So you tell me the number one quarterback in the nation is playing the number two quarterback this Saturday.
I think we've stumbled on a business idea here.
I'm telling you, some guy pitched it last year or whatever. I'll tell you what. Speaking of business, the other thing I want to tell you, Dan, and talk about is our guy Micah Parsons. Looks like Cowboys are going to pick up his 5th-year option. No surprise there. I think the surprise was
that they didn't come to.
They picked him up as a defensive end instead of a linebacker, which would, if they continue on that path this year, would pay him $21.3 million instead of 24. So they would short him a little bit. That being said, it's expected, Dan, still that they'll reach a long-term agreement with him probably before the season, according to all the reports I've read. And again, last year ESPN said the contract could be at least $32 million a year. Be the highest paid defensive player ever in the history of football. There have been some people who said it could be as high as $40 million a year.
Micah's incredible. I don't know if I'd give any defensive player $40 million based on the cap, but if I were to give one, be hard pressed to not be Micah Parsons. I'm not a cap expert, but that's just a ton, especially on the Cowboys. I feel like everyone on that team makes $40 million. They're going to have to pay CeeDee Lamb too, but hopefully he can. Hopefully, know what he can use some of that money on. Maybe some air conditioning for Severance Field or something. Just somehow make it not the hottest place on earth. That would be. He'd earn that contract in a second if he did that.
He already got on the scoreboard. I think he might have had a hand in the new turf they put down. I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, I mean, Severance Field does look nice now, but it is still before it gets cool at the end of this season. It gets hot down there.
Yeah, you got to put a pad beneath the turf and whatever it's built on, and that cooling gel.
Yeah.
Or something. So no, I mean, look, big numbers for Micah possibly coming up here. 14 sacks last year, 40 and a half sacks across 3 seasons. Pretty darn consistent.
I'm sure he's going to be. Sure, he's not going to be resting on his laurels though this offseason after the way things ended. Both in because I think he'd be the first to tell you he was sick again right towards the end of the season too, and probably didn't end the season. He probably had a real good chance at winning Defensive Player of the Year before kind of getting sick again and slowing down a little bit at the end. To Micah's credit, he was the first to say Myles Garrett deserved the Defensive Player of the Year on Twitter. So I think Micah was just happy TJ Watt didn't get it based on some of his. He was. I think he's a fan of Myles Garrett. It'd be hard not to be a fan of his, but I'm sure he's coming for. Micah seems like a guy that if you gave him a choice between Defensive Player of the Year or Super Bowl, he'd take the Super Bowl. But I'm sure he's coming for both this offseason.
I see Mike. Look, Micah's got his own media thing going now, and I think he gets better every time I watch him. It's funny because I know he took some heat for some of his opinions and stuff like that. And hey, that's what happens when you get out there and you kind of speak your mind. But I will tell people again, for the same reason that I predicted that the guy was going to go and win the MVP and the All-Star celebrity basketball game, which I think Skip Bayless tried to shame him for, which is ridiculous, is the same reason why I still believe this guy is going to find a way to get to a Super Bowl, because I just know the Micah Parsons I know him, covered through high school. I never even seen the kid get hurt. I don't think he went out. I don't think he missed a play, and it's really just a competitive streak in him. He really is a fierce competitor. That's not a made up narrative around him. He wants to win, really, really bad. It's probably as much as any athlete I've been around. So we'll see. We got some other guys from Pennsylvania, Dan, who are going to have interest in. I think DeAndre Swift's kind of out there now. Had a pretty good year for the Eagles.
Tyler Boyd's probably one of the better free agents available, and given that situation there in Cincinnati, I've seen some buzz about a homecoming there to Pittsburgh.
He's a really solid receiver, man. If they wouldn't have had T. Higgins or gotten Jamar Chase, I think I'm not sure he's he's not as explosive with those guys, but he's just a really good, solid football player. I had him 2 or 3 years ago. He had a pretty good year, actually, for a low key good year in fantasy. I think it was the year they went to the Super Bowl, right? He was pretty solid.
And legitimately one of the best high school football players in Pennsylvania state history. I think three state championships playing quarterback for Clarendon. Epp always says best big 33 game performances he's ever seen. So John Smith's from Philadelphia too, I believe. He just got cut. I don't think he wants. Christian Barmore's up for extension.
Hey, Christian Barmore, there's one. He took, I think Warren Sapp tried to diss him coming out. Remember that? And Christian Barmore has proven Warren Sapp to be kind of an idiot.
He's the only reason to watch the New England Patriots is Christian Barmore. Everything, you can just turn everything else off and watch the defensive line, and that's the only redeeming quality of that football program.
He's a big nasty dude in the middle, man.
Yeah, but and then we got. I mean, we don't. This is the first year in a while. I feel like we don't have too many local draft guys. Any real local draft guys, right?
Nobody's jumping off the top of my head. I'm sure we got some Pennsylvania guys who are out there. We'll see. I'll tell you, bouncing back to Micah real quick, something interesting about him too. You talk about we're in the off season now, and for a lot of people don't know, I wrote a story last year about Micah Parsons' guru, and he'll come back to Harrisburg and he'll actually fly the guy out. But CDE's coach Lance Dean, who's really a young guy too, still trains Micah. Still does a lot of work with him in the off season.
He doesn't just train; he's been training the other Penn State players too. I believe.
I was about to say he. Interesting, Abdul Carter is moving to defensive end, and Lance was, I think he just went up to State College and has been working with Abdul Carter. So you Penn State folks out there, know how good
Lance on the pod in the coming weeks and kind of chat about that stuff.
Yeah, you guys know how good Abdul Carter is and his potential, and then you know what Micah did. Know that Micah has been working with Lance. Abdul's making that move down to defensive end this year. That's really interesting to me, and it was really eye-opening to see that he's training with Lance. So that could be fun to watch and keep an eye on. Anyway, Dan, look, we've rambled on. We're only contractually obligated, people, contractually obligated to do 30 minutes a week in the off season for this podcast. We usually do a lot more just because we like to hang out and talk. And I will say this too, when we give you guys our Twitter handles or whatever, if you have any things you want us to talk about in the podcast, you can always hit us up. Email us. If there's people you think we should have on, you can always reach out to us. We appreciate you guys listening. We got a big weekend of wrestling coming up. We got a big weekend of basketball. Dan, there's a lot of football players playing basketball too.
Yeah, I mean, one of our best players in the area is Cumberland Valley's Nolan Bazolka, who's a pretty darn good pass rusher himself. He does not play like a defensive end in basketball. He is like one of the best passers. He's tough. In some ways he does because he's tough and physical, but he's also just a really awesome point forward who, sets the table for a really good CV team. So he's one. We got Isaiah Danner from Hershey, who's probably the biggest center in District 3 this past year. He's a big part of what they do too. There's some football players hooping.
You bring up Nolan, and it's funny because my guy Ross Tucker actually was texting me about him last week. I guess he'd been watching his film. Ross has that Go Big recruiting website, and where he kind of gets guys out there and helps connect them in schools. And I think he was kind of shocked that Nolan didn't have any offers yet. So there's a sleeper. We're gonna wrap up this podcast because our producer Megan's already popped up. She's sitting in the dentist office parking lot waiting on her husband and doing this because we can do it like that. We can work like that. We're workers. But there's a sleeper for you guys as we wrap up. Nolan Bazolka, you brought him up.
Yeah, I think he was at Temple's junior day or something. He definitely was at Temple at some point. So
we'd like to turn you guys on to guys. We talked about JJ Kelly last week or the week before. Nolan Bazolka, go check out that Huddle film. Dan, I think we got a podcast. Tell them how to find you on social media.
Dan_Sostek.
And I am at Sports by B Linder, BLINDER, at Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Check us out on PennLive.com too, guys. We're going to be fully loaded with high school sports coverage through this weekend. Really going to blow out wrestling. on Saturday especially. So check us out there. Until next week, we'll see you guys then.
The UPMC sports medicine experts in Central PA are here to help keep you in the game and improve your quality of life, no matter your age or activity level. Visit upmc.com/Central PA SportsMed to learn more.